Welcome to Expats Listen with Ryan and Liz, the podcast where we share the ups and downs, struggles, and celebrations of living abroad.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Liz. How was your week?
I had a very busy week, Liz. I've got a lot of contacts and connections in South Africa who I just haven't been keeping up to date with, and I actually got back into it this week. And I realized how much of a difference it makes to be able to speak to those people. And just a shout out to my wonderful friends in South Africa. I've missed you. I'm sorry I've been so scarce, but it's really good to be talking to you guys again. And you, Liz?
Yeah, I have had a busy week. It has been a hot week. It's always difficult with Mr. Henry, especially because he loves to walk and he loves to go on very long walks, but he does not enjoy heat.
Do you want to share with him his new method of controlling the amount of walking he does in the heat?
This dog is so manipulative because he is so smart. So a few weeks ago, he hurt his paw. He must have stepped on something or something got stuck between his toes, and he picked up his little paw and he started hopping a bit. So I had to pick him up and carry him home. We live on the European 4th floor, which is the American 5th floor with no elevator. So I had to carry him up all of the stairs, and he took a couple of days to get better, but then he was fully healed. Then I took him out this week and we went to this park where it's quite safe and like fully fenced in and lots of dogs can run without their leash. And it's big enough for humans to run as well. Like it's a nice big loop. And I started to run and Mr. Henry decided he did not want to run in that heat. So he picked his little paw up and started hopping. And I ran over to him, checked his paw. What's wrong? Oh no. And there was nothing wrong with his paw. As soon as I came back over to him, he put it down and he walked normally. I was like, okay, that's weird. Maybe something was stuck in it and it's gone now. And then I started running again and he picked his paw up again. Because there was nothing in his paw. He just knew that if he was hopping with one paw in the air, I would not run away from him and I would walk slowly the way he wanted to walk on his walk in the heat.
And that is our super evil genius dog who has learned his new trick. Hell of a week for him too.
Well, what are we talking about this week, Ryan?
Today is a big topic. Today we're talking about the expat versus immigrant debate. What is an expat? What is an immigrant? And what do those things mean between each other?
Yeah, I think they're both such loaded words these days that they bring such different pictures to mind. And I think that there's a lot of people who are using one word or another as a way to put people down and as a way to put other people into a class that's less than whatever they view themselves as.
Yeah, because I think it's such a loaded topic that everyone has their own definition of it and their own understanding of what it means and who it applies to and what kind of repercussions and implications they carry. And I think that that's really what it is that shapes the world that we're living in. And so many people really get treated differently because of it. And I find it to be difficult. And I don't know if we're going to be able to find any kind of final answer on how to process this whole matter. But I do think that it's a discussion that needs to be had, at the very least, with yourself to understand where you fit in on this big debate.
Yeah, so I guess a great place for us to start maybe is dictionary definitions, right? So let's try with the Oxford Dictionary definition, which says that an expat is a person who lives outside of their native country. And an immigrant is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. So the only real difference between the Oxford Dictionary definitions is that word permanent.
Permanent. What does that mean? How long is permanent? Is it forever?
I guess, right? But who knows what forever is? And are people really deciding on forever?
Because things change, and whoever it is that's going to measure this at the end of forever is the only person who's going to be able to say, yes, indeed, that person came to live here forever. So I don't know whether or not that Oxford Dictionary definition is that helpful, if I'm honest, because it also occurs to me that it says for an expat, being a person who lives outside their native country, and an immigrant, a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country, is really dependent on who's making that call. Is it me? Is it them? And then I get to choose, because that definition applies to pretty much anyone who's not living in their home country.
Yeah. So the way we see it, I think there's really 4 different ways that people distinguish between expats and immigrants. The first is what I think is the most common and what we experience the most on a day-to-day basis, which is race and class. So Liz, that's me. I am white. I am American. I have a navy blue passport. So I'm an expat.
And I'm brown. I'm from Africa, and I have a green passport. And what that means in a global sense is that I'm an immigrant. And if the color of my skin doesn't give it away immediately, the color of my passport will, because I'm carrying a large number of markers of people who are traditionally considered as being immigrants, which is kind of heavy to know that I've got that designation and classification without even opening up my mouth and saying anything about myself. Very strange.
And I think it becomes even more interesting when you put us together, because it seems really clear for people that I am the expat and Ryan is the immigrant. But then when they find out that we're married, we don't nicely fit into a box anymore. And are we a couple that are expat immigrants? Are we expats? Are we immigrants? Can we be one of those things when one of us is white and American and the other is brown and African? Or who are we now?
It's a very complicated thing even between us, because I feel as though even I look at Liz as being an expat and I look at myself as being an immigrant, because I myself have given this designation to myself, because I feel as though I identify more with the people who are coming here with a lower class and a lower social status. And that's a bit difficult sometimes, because when we present ourselves to society, we aren't on the same page of how we expect other people to view us. So when we go places, I often find myself needing to interact with people in a very cagey way while they figure out which box I should be put in, the same way that Liz is explaining how tricky it can be to judge us. Because an example is, there are stereotypes around people who look like me. And the question here in Portugal would be, well, are you an Uber driver? Are you an Uber Eats driver? What kind of restaurant do you work in as a cook in the back? And those are the immediate expectations. And when we go to maybe more westernized countries where there's been maybe many years worth of brown people immigrating, one of the assumptions there, so let's say in America or in the UK or in Australia, the expectation there is that we are some kind of IT couple, because the assumption is that I could only work in IT because I'm a brown guy and I'm reasonably well spoken at times. And that's a really difficult thing to process, because I need to have a conversation with everyone, get through that initial awkward and uncomfortable conversation while they ask me probing questions about, where are you from? What kind of work do you do? Why do you speak that way? Why are you with this very white girl? Why are you speaking in this language? Why do you live this way? Which is very akin to generic expat life, before they realize that they might want to put me in the expat bucket. And you, Liz, how do people view you?
Yeah, I would say people definitely view me as an expat. I think that I've actually never been called an immigrant. I can't remember anyone ever saying that to me, even though I have lived in so many different places. And I specifically remember I dated an Australian guy before I met Ryan, and I met his father in Australia, and he started talking to me about immigrants in Australia and how terrible it was and how they were coming to this country and taking all of the Australians' jobs, and they need to stop this and they need to do something about it. And I said, you know, I'm an immigrant, that I've come to this country and taken an Australian job, right? And he was like, no, not you. Like, you don't fit that. You're not who I'm talking about at all. Of course not. And I think it's just such a clear example of how people view race in terms of being an immigrant or not. Because for him, I'm white. So of course I'm not one of those bad immigrants who's coming and taking jobs, but I was doing exactly what he was complaining about.
Yeah, it's very contradictory in terms of how people apply these rules. And one of the other ways that I see it come out in a very uncomfortable way is in conversations with people who are wholeheartedly self-embracing of the expat label. So wealthy people from westernized countries who have moved to another place. And when you talk to them about immigration and the movement of people, political issues, economic issues that are as a result of this kind of globalization, they tend to talk about themselves in such a stark contrast to the people who are brown and who are from the Indian subcontinent and from the Far East and from other countries which are generally viewed as being third world. And it's weird to me to think that we are all in the same boat as people who aren't necessarily from where we're living right now, and we're all part of the same legal framework for being here, and we're all part of the same society and community. We literally live next door to each other, but I carry this particular label while you carry a different one. And it's uncomfortable sometimes because the way that some expats talk about people from poorer countries who have made the same move as them ends up being kind of like discriminatory in the way that it sounds.
Definitely discriminatory.
And I kind of feel as though I identify a lot with the poorer people who have moved across. And I find it difficult to feel safe in that relationship with those fellow expats, which is an ironic situation to be in.
Yeah, for sure. It's tricky. And that's the thing. Like, the more we talk about it, the more complex I feel like it gets, because there's no easy answer to this.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, there's better treatment for some people and worse treatment for others. And if I benefit from the better treatment, primarily because I'm with Liz, I tend to feel rather guilty, and I find it very uncomfortable when I have to interact with other people who are pretty much exactly the same as me, knowing that I'm getting better treatment. I really feel that that's unfair, and I think that a lot of it flows and stems from this designation that's being handed out willy-nilly to people on a random basis.
And we can definitely see that difference on a regular basis. When Ryan goes to do some kind of bureaucratical task for the Portuguese government, and he walks up and his number is called and he goes there on his own, there's definitely one level of treatment that he gets. And then when I come and I stand next to him and I put my arm around him and I make it clear that we're together, the treatment changes. It doesn't go from terrible to good, but it definitely gets better.
You can achieve great things with white girl privilege, even if it's by association. And I have truly benefited from it, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. So that's the first one, race. So the second way that people are separating expat from immigrant is this word permanence. So just like the Oxford Dictionary is saying that an expat is maybe a couple of months, maybe a couple of years, maybe who knows how long. There's no mention of time whatsoever. An immigrant is forever. And permanent, it's such an interesting word here, because are we really moving to a country for the very first time and deciding that we are definitely going to be staying forever?
Forever is a long time, and it's dependent on so many different things. Do you really get to choose that? Because life changes really quickly, and sometimes even the place that you've moved to might change really quickly. Maybe at some point in time, it isn't a great place to live and you might need to leave. What does that do to your specific social standing and the classification that you carry?
And for people like us, are we planning to live in Portugal permanently? No. But do we have any plan to leave right now? No. So what does that mean? Are we expats? Are we immigrants? Are we here permanently? Are we not? I can't get behind that word forever. And I can't get behind that word permanent for anywhere that I've ever lived.
I think it's such a difficult question to answer, because we often ask our expat and immigrant friends whether or not they plan on leaving this country at any point in time. And everyone generally gives the same answer of, well, things are good here right now, and maybe we'll leave, maybe we'll go, maybe something else will come up, which is a completely reasonable answer. But I feel that if their status is based on what could happen in the future, it's kind of silly for us to give them a label right now.
I would agree. And like you said, there's so many things that come up. Like someone in your family could get sick. You might have to go take care of them. Some rules could change. You might actually not be able to stay anymore, depending on the visa rules. There might be any host of things that change in the country that you're from or in the country that you're in, which would make your plans change.
Yeah, I think the other thing, though, that's tied up to this level of permanence is your association to economic security. Economic security and the privilege it provides gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of where you choose to stay and how long you choose to stay there. A lot of people who are moving into new countries, I'm hesitant to use expat or immigrant because I don't know who I'm referring to specifically, but people who move into new countries are often people who are looking for better work opportunities and business opportunities and career advancement or investment opportunities on a smaller scale. And what tends to happen is that you need to decide based on whether or not you're able to pay your bills, whether or not you're able to make a life there. So it isn't necessarily a case of choosing to be any specific place based on anything other sometimes than whether or not you can make it work. We've had so many friends who have come here, wonderful people. We've developed great relationships with them while they've tried to start a life here in Portugal to get going and, find some level of routine and some level of financial security, and it just hasn't worked. And they've needed to basically pack up everything and either move back to their home country or find a third place to move to where prospects could be better. And that, for me, really does speak a lot to whether or not someone can make a call of permanence in their own story.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
The third one, where I think people are separating the difference between expat and immigrant, is the country that you happen to be in. I feel like this is a subcategory of racism, but it's more based on the place that you currently are instead of the place that you're from. So in a country like Kenya or India, most of the people who move there would be considered expats, no matter where they're from. And Ryan would be considered an expat in Kenya, being from South Africa. Even though he's brown, even though he's African, the label of expat would be used in Kenya for him. But in a country like the USA or Australia, most people would be called immigrants. So even Australians in the USA, even British people who come to the USA would be often called immigrants.
But there we go again, is that there is this social stratification even before we start applying the labels, because automatically Liz, being a white American woman, is able to guarantee herself the categorization of being an expat wherever she goes.
Yep.
That isn't America. Whereas for me, it is dependent of where it is that I'm being called out on. And that's really difficult to accept because it means that I need to prepare myself for different levels of treatment from different people who are part of society. What kind of bureaucracy am I going to need to deal with? How much more difficult is it going to be for me to achieve certain things? I often wonder what my life would be like if it wasn't for Liz's white girl privilege, which has helped me so much. Because I know that there are so many things that I wouldn't be able to do when I go to a country where I'm considered an immigrant and needing to fight that much harder to get taken seriously or to be helped or to be considered for things that aren't necessarily given to people who look like me and come from a place where I'm from. And so that's a massive point, because as Liz is saying, when you go to America, I get very nervous. I'm very nervous when I go to America, because the way that things could go down for me is very different, because I am a very strong immigrant in that country, as opposed to when we go to Kenya, I feel so much more comfortable because I know that I'm being considered an expat, and therefore I'm not afraid of the police there. I'm not afraid of asking public servants to help me or general society to assist me in any way or to connect with anyone, because that door is open. And that's a really strange feeling to have, because it can change on either end of one plane trip for me.
Yeah, it's really quite heavy to deal with.
And let me ask you, Liz, when you go to a country that maybe has a bigger space between immigrant and expat, so let's call it the aura around being an expat is much higher. So let's talk about an American in a deep, dark place in Africa. How do you negotiate that? How do you feel about that? What is life like between those experiences, as opposed to, let's say, Portugal, where you're closer to this community than you would be in Africa?
Yeah, I think there's this level of guilt that you feel for getting better treatment. There's this level of discomfort that you feel when people are opening doors for you or going out of their way to help you with something, and the, oh, hello, ma'am, kind of language. I think that it can be very uncomfortable to be put in that position where you feel as though the reason that people are treating you that way is because people who look like you, who have been there in the past, have demanded that treatment. And I think for me, whenever I'm in a place where people see that I'm a white American and they go out of their way to do everything for me, all I can think is how terrible they must have been treated in the past by people who look like me. And I think there's a lot of guilt that's associated with that. And I feel like it's my job to be as nice as possible to everyone that I meet in that country, to show that I don't think I'm better than they are.
It's really interesting because I've seen Liz do this. You know, she's friendly and kind to everyone everywhere that we go. So her treatment of people isn't dependent on where we are geographically. And that's really cool, and I really appreciate that. But one of the things that really blows my mind every time when I watch this happen in the different places that we are is the way that people are conditioned to deal with you. Because as you say, they've had experiences before of dealing with people like you.
Yeah.
And so they've got an expectation of how they're supposed to treat you without ever having met you. They don't know whether or not you're a nice person. They don't know whether or not you deserve to be treated like royalty. But the thing is that there has been an establishment of the status of this person that they're speaking to before you even showed up, and therefore you deserve a specific kind of treatment. And I wonder what that must feel like, being someone who knows that, hey, you know what, this person is from America, from the UK, from Australia, so they need to be treated a certain way. And then looking at someone else who might be from their own neighborhood, their literal neighbors, friends and family, and looking at them and saying, I need to treat them less than that person who's from those countries. That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's actually crazy.
Now, it really is a fascinating thing. And I think when we look at these kinds of examples, it really makes me think about how much of an impact this has got on the way society is running, especially now where globalization is so much more extreme than it's ever been before.
So the fourth and final way that we've seen people distinguish the difference between expat and immigrant is choice. So when we posted this on our Instagram, one of our followers, Quiero un panino con cheese, pointed out that her distinction between expat and immigrant is who decided that you would go to that country. And was it a company who told you this is where you're relocating? Or was it your own decision to go or your own decision to stay? And this is a really interesting distinction, I think, and one that we really hadn't thought about before. And I think this is also quite country dependent too, because I know that in the US, you're not considered an expat, even if your company told you to be there. You're definitely still considered an immigrant, depending on where you're from, depending on your country, depending on so many things. And yeah, I feel like this idea of choice is really it's kind of putting the power back in your hands of, I chose to be here, so I am an immigrant, versus we're here for this contract, we're here for this job, so I am an expat because this is quite temporary, and if this job goes away, then I go away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm pulling things apart here, but even inside that consideration, a big part of it is understanding what it is that's motivating people to make that choice. So an example of people who are in dire straits economically in a ex-third world country, needing to find a way to feed their family and move forward, jumping on an airplane and starting a new life in a new place, how much of a choice was that? Because if you were to put yourself in those shoes, understanding that you are on the verge of catastrophe or living in extreme poverty, with there being no other way out other than to leave that situation and try in a new place that has more economic power, I do question whether or not that's a choice. Because what else are you going to do? Stay in the same place and struggle for how long? Watch your family disintegrate and struggle into future generations? What are you going to do? Again, that's the question. I don't really have any answer for it. But what I'm saying is that if you choose to jump on an airplane and start a new life somewhere, or cross a border and start a new life somewhere, I don't automatically assume that the choice is full of fulfillment and ambition and positivity for some new life that's full of sunshine and love. Sometimes it's a case of, I'm doing this because I need to survive. And being able to appreciate people who are in that stream of life is an important thing. And I don't think that we're doing it if we feel as though we need to be discriminatory because they carry the label of immigrant, because it was a choice.
All right, Ryan, I have a big question.
Sorry, that was a bit heavy for you, Liz.
No, it was good. It was good. I do have a bigger question, though.
Really?
From a psychology point of view, as a therapist for expats specifically, what happens to someone when they are treated as less than by the people that are around them?
Yeah, it is a very complicated thing psychologically, and I don't know if anything applies to anyone completely. I don't know if there's a template response and feeling that people go through, but I do know that it really does request a great deal of consideration from the people who are in these situations, because they're needing to consider their own identities. They're needing to consider how they fit in with the rest of the society that they're living in. They're needing to ask questions about what their value is and who they are and how they fit in and how they're going to make it work. And it becomes very difficult because sometimes if you're up against it on a community level, you can end up becoming very angry. I've been there before, of needing to look at someone else in the eye and make a case for yourself to explain that, no, I am educated, no, I am hardworking, and needing to actually work hard to convince them of that so that I can have the same opportunities that other people can have. And I really have a soft spot in my heart for so many people who are moving from, inverted commas, poor countries to rich countries, and really people busting their butts to contribute economically and socially and working hard to put their kids through school and to build a new life, and still needing to deal with discrimination and just general negative perspectives and perceptions. And that's really hard to see because like I said, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I'm part of that treatment, but it is difficult. And I just want people to know that the main thing that you can do is actually engage in discourse and discussion and to talk about it, because it is something that affects us all. And it's something that shapes so much of how the world sees this issue. Because if you keep quiet about it, that anger inside as a person can grow and turn into something different. the way that people are treating each other just in general ends up taking a lot more of a negative tinge on an international relations basis. And if you start to consider what it is that we can do to improve the situation of making sure that everyone is treated with kindness and respect, talking about it is the first place to start. So that's my thinking as a psychologist. Having that conversation, getting into the topic, talking about how you feel and the fact that we're fighting for equality rather than anything else, I think it's an important way of looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're never alone, and whatever you're going through, someone else has probably gone through it. And to know that they've also gone through it just makes you feel less alone. And to be able to share some of these frustrations, to share some of these pent up feelings that you have inside, whether it's to a friend, to a therapist, to whoever, just getting them out often makes them feel less heavy.
Absolutely, because these are heavy feelings, and it's not a weird thing to feel what it is that you're feeling, because a lot of people have this topic in their minds and have considered it, but the conversations are not happening around it. And that's the first place to start.
So yeah, I think the biggest way that we've really seen this is that immigrants are poor and struggling and not as good as the people who live in this country. Expats are rich and powerful and deserving of a red carpet being rolled out for them. And I think that people who come here with those labels are often thinking that. So do you feel as though people in your new country should speak your language? Should they cater to your every whim? Should they be really grateful that you're there? Or do you feel like you need to make yourself smaller and quieter in your new country, that you can't rock the boat, that you need to make sure that people in this country know just how grateful you are to be there? And I think a bigger question is, how would it feel to be somewhere in the middle? To take up the space of a person because you're a person? To not expect people to treat you any better or to treat you any worse than they would treat anyone else? And to embrace some of the customs in your new place and also bring some of the traditions that you love from back home. I feel like expat versus immigrant, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And it doesn't have to be versus. We're all in this together. I wish we would act like it.
Absolutely. I think adding to a society is an important way of understanding what other people are bringing, because there seems to be this level of insecurity around new cultures being added to a particular culture, and people get so insecure about it that they don't realize that things become better for them being able to experience something bigger and greater. If there's a reduction of cultural aspects of the original society, that's not a question around the people who are entering that society. It's a question of the people who are already there. And being able to say, hey, we're all in this together. We're all wanting to live a life that's fuller and more colorful and more positive. That's there, and it's for the taking. And having this conversation and trying to figure out how we should treat each other in a way that makes us all feel valued is always going to be number one. And that brings me to another question, Liz. Why do we use the word expats in our Expats Listen podcast? Why did we choose that name?
Yeah, so I'm going to be very honest with you guys. In my digital marketing career, I think that we identify as both. And I think we identify as expats, we identify as immigrants, and choosing a name for this podcast, the most important thing for me was to use the word that you are using. And most people that we know who are foreigners, who are living here, most of the people I knew when I was a foreigner living in Australia, most of the people that I knew when I was living in Kenya and South Africa and all different places identified as expats, are searching for the word expat. And I wanted to make our podcast easy to find. I think really this isn't a podcast just for expats. This is a podcast for anyone who is living in another country or thinking about making the move to another country. And yeah, we chose Expats Listen strictly to make it easier for you guys to find us.
Absolutely. This is a podcast made by people who are expats and immigrants. Sometimes we might feel like expats in the morning and immigrants in the evening. And this is for everyone. And we really aren't the kind of people who are handing out the expat and immigrant labels very easily or very quickly. And I kind of feel as though from my side, I'm happy to be an immigrant and I'm happy to call everyone an immigrant. And if that doesn't make people happy, then I'm happy to be an expat and then to call everyone an expat because we're all one and the same. Next, Liz, what do we got coming up?
All right. So our next segment on the podcast is Would You Rather? So in this segment, we've got a series of questions and we will ask, would you rather A or B, where A and B are going to be countries. So we'll be choosing countries that either one or both of us has been to. And we're going to do the same questions for this round of episodes. And we'll get your input and figure out what you guys like hearing about and what questions you want asked. And then that might be for the next round. But for this round, we've got our questions and I have got our countries, Ryan. So for this week's Would You Rather, we are going to choose between France and New Zealand.
Oh, this is going to be tough. Those are two great rugby playing nations. And I have an affinity towards France because of the deliciousness of their food. So really keen to get into this.
Well, the first one starts with food. So, Ryan, would you rather eat a pizza in France or in New Zealand?
Am I correct in saying that France shares a border with Italy?
You are correct.
I would assume that there have been one or two people from Italy who have defected to France and are cranking out amazing pizza. So I'm going to go France for my pizza. You?
I have to agree. I think France for the pizza makes sense. I think we're going to get... The French just do food so well. I feel like if it was any food, the French would do it well. And I'll be happy to eat the French version of anything.
Absolutely. I think that France, I want people in France to know that I feel as though they have some of the best food on the planet. The way that they eat out there is really something special, and it's one of my favorite things about that place.
Completely. All right, next up. Would you rather go for a hike in France or in New Zealand?
Oh, that's a really good question because I know that there are some really good hikes in France, which we've actually done.
Yeah.
But I know that they made Lord of the Rings in New Zealand, and I would absolutely do one of the trails that one of the hobbits might have completed in that movie franchise. And I don't know if there's a real Mordor, but I would like to go there, so I choose New Zealand. And you?
I'm agreeing with you too much, but yes, I'm also going New Zealand for this one. I think diversity of landscapes, stunning landscapes, not to say anything against France. There's mountains, there's ocean views, there's lots of gorgeousness in France to hike, but I'm going to go New Zealand on this one.
Good call.
Okay. Would you rather see the wildlife in France or New Zealand? What stands out to you?
I want to take a moment here because I need to admit something to you and to our listeners. In this podcast, I tend to make this statement that there isn't any good wildlife in Europe. And it's such a arrogant and ignorant thing to say because in this past week, we went on a little boat trip on some wetlands just a couple of minutes away from our house. And while we were on that trip, we saw huge swarms of birds, flamingos, eagles, some of the most beautiful creatures I've ever seen. They were fish jumping out of the water, glistening in the afternoon sun. It was absolutely gorgeous. And when I looked at that, I realized that I was not giving Europe the credit it deserves for being biodiverse.
I think it's tough because you are from Africa and you're used to things like elephants and giraffes. And then you come to Europe and you're not seeing things like elephants and giraffes or lions and all of this. So I understand why you have dissed the European wildlife in the past, but I think it's nice that you appreciate it more now. So that said, Are you choosing France or are you choosing New Zealand?
That is still a good question. I'm kind of thinking, let me go for New Zealand because I know that they've got a lot of marine life, which is really interesting. I don't know too much about the mammals and the rest of it, but I'd give it a go. Maybe I'd be keen to discover what New Zealand's got. You?
Nice. I think I've gone whale watching in New Zealand before and it was pretty incredible. And I think if you're there during a migration season, it's absolutely stunning. Also, this is going to sound weird, but the glowworms in New Zealand were some of my favorite wildlife that I've ever seen. There are these caves that you go into and they call it blackwater rafting because it's like rafting in a cave and the cave is completely lit by glowworms. And it was really incredible. All right, next up. Would you rather ask for directions in France or in New Zealand? How's your French, Ryan?
I really like New Zealand people from New Zealand. They've got this specific kind of humor which really resonates with me. And I don't know. I don't want to say that it's the same as South African humor.
But it's similar.
But it is similar. They enjoy a joke. They enjoy the humorous part of life. And people are positive there in a way that is able to turn dark and sad stuff into something possible and almost kind of enjoyable at times. So I'm always actually keen to have a conversation with a New Zealander because I tend to find it easy to talk to them. And yeah, I would say New Zealand. I would ask for directions and then become friends with someone.
Yeah, I think it also really helps that Ryan is quite muscly and broad-shouldered and looks very much like a rugby player. So whenever he meets people from rugby nations, I think it's very easy for them to be like, oh, do you play rugby? Let's talk about that.
Also, I will say this, it's important that people in New Zealand don't think that I'm being too kind because South Africa has never lost to New Zealand in a Rugby World Cup final. So I don't want to be that tight with you because I am better than you because I'm South African. So just always remember that, please.
Wow, those are fighting words.
But please still give me directions to where it is that I'm going. I'm lost without you.
All right, I think this is an obvious answer for you, but would you rather eat street food in France or New Zealand?
I'd eat any food in France. You?
Yeah, I mean, I think gas station food in France has been mind-blowingly amazing for us. So I can't imagine going wrong with food in France. This is an interesting one. Would you rather live for 3 months in France or in New Zealand?
I think I would go 3 months in New Zealand because it's so far away. And if I'm going to go there, I don't want to go there for a short period of time. I want to spend enough time there to have a real look around, get some real experience with the people there, understand how people live there, see maybe lesser known sites in terms of the nature and the tourism things that you can do there. So I reckon 3 months in New Zealand exploring both islands would be, I think, time well spent. I think France is also quite diverse, so it's not an easy choice. But yeah, I would go New Zealand. I think there's a lot to see and do there. I like the solitude of the place. It looks like you can find space to be alone there, and I quite enjoy that. Where would you choose to do 3 months?
I think I'd do 3 months in France because I think that living day-to-day French life would be really amazing. And to just like pick a little small town and get your local bakery and your local coffee shop and figure out my local hikes that I want to take and actually having like a normal life for 3 months in France would be a really beautiful experience.
How would you negotiate the language?
I think I would just speak Spanish to them the way that I do now and not get by very well. But I have found that people in general are quite nice, and I think I could manage.
Sure, 3
a
months.
lot of Google Translate.
3 months in France without the language. I think I am interested to hear how that goes for you. But
maybe I'll pick some of it up.
that would be cool. I think that on the topic of language, I'm sure we'll cover this in greater depth at some point. One of the things that I appreciate so much is when you make any kind of sincere effort to speak the language of the place that you're visiting, I'm always so grateful for the response that people give in those countries, because you get so much positivity from the goodwill of trying to speak that language that you end up actually making friends. You end up becoming part of that group of people. You are able to help other people and be helped. It's a really cool thing. So maybe your time in France would be really good for your connections with people there.
And I always do that. I know like 10 to 20 words in like 20 different languages because I always try to make that effort, and a little bit goes a long way, like you said.
I agree.
All right, next up. Would you rather visit for a long weekend in France or New Zealand?
I would do a long weekend in France quite happily. And I think that I would probably target specific provinces of France to say, this long weekend, I'm going to explore this particular area, because I know that they've got some incredible history there. It's a really historically significant place, and they've done a really good job of documenting a lot of that history and showcasing it. And I think a long weekend there of eating creme brulee, baguette, some good cheese, and just going through the lands, I think would be really fun. I think, you've got the Pyrenees, you've got amazing beaches down in the south, you've got a lot to see and do, and you can choose what you want for that 4-day experience. What would you choose?
Yeah, I'm also going France. I feel like one region, like one area is all you can do in a long weekend. And I feel like there's so many choices.
So 3 months and a long weekend.
Yeah, let's do it.
You want to move to France. Okay. All right. Okay.
All right. Next up, would you rather do a road trip in France or New Zealand? And I'll go first. I'm going New Zealand here. So even though I'm living for a while in France, I'm doing the New Zealand road trip. I have done road trips in France. I have done road trips in New Zealand. And there's just something that hits different about a New Zealand road trip. I feel like sheep traffic is more common than car traffic in New Zealand. And some of the places that you go are so wild and unexplored feeling and just beautiful and incredible. And you can just pull over onto the side of the road and explore. And I really love that in a road trip in New Zealand.
Oh, that's super cool. I would agree with you. I think I've also done the road trip in France with you, and it was really amazing and incredible experience. But I think that mystery and the freedom that New Zealand offers of going into a very remote area surrounded by incredible nature and the ruralness of the whole thing really does have a specific charm to it. So I would definitely do a road trip in New Zealand as well.
All right. Next up, I would be shocked if you don't choose the same as me, but would you rather learn the language in France or New Zealand?
So in New Zealand, what language would you be learning there?
I think it would either be English with a New Zealand accent or Maori.
I really have such a love for Maori culture. All of the Pacific Islands, in fact, because every person that I've ever met from that part of the world, they've always been incredible human beings, some of the nicest people that I've ever met, and just quality individuals. I love the culture. I love the values that those people have got. And in a silly way, I don't know if anyone else has ever asked themselves this question of, if you were to be a different race or culture, what would you be? Maori is up there for me. Like one of the ones that, if there was a giant cosmic shakeup and I needed to wake up tomorrow in a different body and place, if I was a New Zealander, I really would be quite happy. But having said that, though, if you learn French, you're able to operate in massive geographic locations across this whole planet. You can communicate with millions upon millions of people everywhere. So it's not even a question of what do I like more or what do I like less. It's just a practicality thing. So French has to be it. You?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, I feel like being able to snap my fingers and speak French would open up so many doors. And it is true that Maori people are amazing. Maori culture is fascinating and rich. And there aren't a lot of Maori speakers, and it would be cool, but I'm choosing French. Okay, last one. Are you ready? Would you rather buy a house in France or in New Zealand?
That's a really good question. I think that realistically speaking, right now, I happen to know that New Zealand is going through a lot in their economy, where there's actually a lot of struggle with the amounts of money people are needing to pay for basic goods, and certainly the price of houses. So I don't know if it would make sense to buy a house out there because of the price we would need to pay, as well as the fact that we could only visit very seldomly because it's so far away. I think that there is an attraction to New Zealand because I think it's such a beautiful place. But I would say France, because there are certain places in France where you can surf really nicely. There's certain places in France that have incredible weather. There's certain places in France that give you your own space and time. So I would say France just because it's easier, not because I like it any more or any less than New Zealand. You?
It's interesting that you're using the word easier, because I feel like buying a house in New Zealand would actually be easier.
What makes it easier?
It's all in English, and even though their houses are more expensive, the New Zealand dollar is worth a lot less. So I think a house in New Zealand and a house in France would actually be quite similarly priced. So I do think it would be easier in New Zealand, but the getting there would be the hard part. I feel like you would need to spend a lot of time going back and forth. We have a Henry, our wonderful dog, who couldn't come with us back and forth. So I guess in that sense, it is a lot easier to go with France. And yeah, I think both would be, the buying would be easier in New Zealand, but the owning would be easier in France.
And you'd be living in a country that doesn't historically win as many World Cups as South Africa. And I don't know whether or not that's the way you want to live.
Well, wouldn't it be either country? Because both France and New Zealand historically just can't win as many World Cups as South Africa.
We don't even talk about France and World Cups. It's not even a conversation. New Zealand is hot on our trails, but still trailing for sure. But well, if you wanna live in France, then I think that's a good call. You know, then maybe that's the place to be. You want to spend your 3 months and your long weekends there. I think that might be the place to be, eh? And thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Expats Listen this week. It's been so good to share this with you. I know a very polarizing topic and a lot to think about, I think, for all of us. And I'm sure that this is going to raise up quite a few questions and thoughts and feelings from everyone who's listened, because everyone's got a different perspective on this matter. And we would love to hear what you think and what you feel and what your take is on the expat versus immigrant conversation. And if you've got anything that you do want to share with us, we would love to hear it. We can talk about it in another show, and you can reach out to us on Expats Listen on Instagram, or you can email us on expatslisten@gmail.com. That is expatslisten@gmail.com, or on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. And until we speak again, have a good week. Bye-bye.